Melanoma Matters is an educational resource, and the opinions we express are our own and do not reflect medical advice. If you have questions specific to your own situation, please contact your own clinician. This podcast may be available in both audio and visual, so please check your platform.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Melanoma Matters. I'm Sapna Patel.
And I'm James Larkin. Hi.
Hi. We thought we'd do more targeted therapy today. So we've done Columbus 7 years. So coBRIM, which I think was one that you were intimately involved with. How intimately you can share. And then COMBI-d, which was part of the kind of COMBI-v, COMBI-d amalgamated study. There's some long-term follow-up there. Before we do that, it's so funny now trying to think of things we don't know about each other or funny things. So I guess the question for you, because I'm bearing the lead here a little bit, but have you ever been to a film premiere?
No, not that I can remember, but thank you for the question. As it happens, I might be going to one. I don't know this yet, actually. It hasn't. I was talking to my brother at the weekend this week on Thursday. So one of my brothers is coming to stay because he's going to the film premiere. And I said, oh, you're coming to stay. In fact, you know what? I haven't told you this. I found out yesterday that it's not just him coming to stay. So his wife's coming to stay as well. And his friend is coming to stay as well. I think his friend's called Steve, but I'm not entirely. So all these people are coming to stay at our house this Thursday to go to this film premiere. And I said, all right, do you think you get me a ticket for the film premiere? Because you're coming to stay at our house. And that's still up in the air. Anyway, the film's called The Penguin Lessons. And Steve Coogan's in it. And it's about, there's a book called The Penguin Lessons, came out a few years ago. And it's about, it's semi-autobiographical. The author writes under a nom de plume. And it's about a teacher in Argentina in the 70s who befriended or took a penguin in who'd been injured in an oil slick or something like that and washed up on a beach. And I've read the book and it's a really nice book. And I don't know about the film. I think it's going to be like a feel-good sort of British type film, but those are nice if you're in the right mood. And it's black tie. I also found that out yesterday when I was talking to my brother.
Excellent.
So, well, not really.
You have to wear a penguin
outfit to the penguin film.
That's cute.
So if that ends up happening, I'll get some pictures.
But maybe what would be cute is if your brother's wife wears a tuxedo.
I don't think that's happening, actually.
That's a good look, right? That's a good look, a woman in a sharp tuxedo outfit.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Actually, I hadn't really thought about that, but I don't think that's going to happen. So if it does work out, and it's 72 hours from now, so it's not long to find out, I'll definitely get some pictures. But yeah, some of the stuff about
for our video watchers, I think they would like to see Larkin in a penguin suit.
Yeah, a penguin suit sort of sounds bad, doesn't it? It reminds you of Penguin in Batman or something.
Okay,
rather than tuxedo, dinner jacket, black tie. Okay. If you see what I mean. Plus, I don't wear it very often, so there's always going to be a slight issue when you get your dinner jacket out, right? If you see what I mean.
More reason why we want to see the pictures. Come on.
Sorry, say that again.
Even more reason why we want to see the pictures. So come on.
All right. Okay. So let's wait and see. So who's going to start this, and what we're going to start with here? 5 years from coBRIM?
Super good question. Yeah. So it's 5 years from coBRIM, or what's the COMBI-d one? It's 5 years with COMBI-d. So either one. You choose one, I'll choose the other. Okay,
let's do coBRIM. That's probably you don't mind. CCR, October 21, so a few years ago now. Paolo Ascietto is the lead author, and then Grant MacArthur, senior author. We were certainly involved in this study, and actually Tony Rivas was one of the other main people. We said that in the episode we had with Tony. In fact, we talked about this a little bit, I think. And I remember, and you might remember as well, seeing the data for the very first time for coBRIM. We're in probably 2014, and me and Tony were, I think, the only academic investigators on the call, and we were actually, I mean, it was striking data when we first saw the PFS benefit for VEM-COBI over COBI. So I don't think we need to dwell too much, honestly, on the trial design, and it had been reported first in 2014, in fact, in NEJM, and this is, like we said, 5-year outcome. So maybe just take a little look at some of the figures and maybe see what we can extract from that. I mean, the overall survival, so this is figure 1. You can see there that the medians are quoted. Actually, the hazard ratio isn't quoted there, but the median OS for VEM-COBI, 22.5 months. Placebo plus VEM is 17 months. Curves do come together a little bit, actually, at 5 years, and there's a lot of censoring after that. I think if you look at the forest plot, pretty much all the subgroups are benefiting from VEM-COBI. If you look at a few other sort of subgroup type analyses, this is still all in figure 1. So you've got LDH normal versus LDH elevated, for example, really big difference there, which is pretty, I think that comes out of all these studies that have now been analysed for that over the years, that if you've got a normal LDH at baseline, you're really doing a lot better, which I think stands for the natural history of the disease and also pretty much all our treatments as well. There's one of these analyses by CR versus PR versus no response. This is figure 1D. And again, predictably, in my view, you're really seeing pretty significant variation. Figure 2 is all about splitting out tumour burden, LDH, and ECOG performance status, and it's sort of figure 2A shows you how that was done, but you're trying to pull out these different groups. And so the best one in blue, this is OS, is normal LDH, sum of tumour diameters less than 45 millimeters, and predictably once you start kind of getting more tumour burden and you get a higher LDH, then you're really getting very poor outcomes again, which exactly I think mirrors what we see in clinic. Same sort of analysis with involvement of organ sites, 3 or more organ sites and metastasis. And again, I think there's quite a lot of work on this now. And I think it really confirms, validates, if you like, what we see in clinic. Figure 3 is PFS. And again, you can see a pretty clear difference, which we knew about already. Same for LDH, and then the same for sort of quality of response. Safety, I don't think there were really any late safety signals here that sort of hadn't been reported previously. So, I mean, I think it's good to see those 5-year data. I think they're relatively consistent with the other trial data sets. And you're probably going to quiz me at length about how much does MEK inhibition add, but I'll pause there and then you can say something maybe.
I wouldn't do that to you, not with that. Did you tell us in table 1, or did you mention what percentage of the study was V600E versus V600K?
No, I didn't. But if you've got that at your fingertips far away.
I don't know if I see it either. It may be in the original report and not here. Let me just check real quick.
Yeah, I can't remember. Sorry. Go on.
No, it's okay. I bring it up because of our COMBI-d study. And when we discussed that study, 9% of the study had V600K. And as a result, now that's an adjuvant trial, of course, but as a result, it looks like they missed their hazard ratio for OS significance. And it was simply due to that 9% being V600K. If you did subgroup analysis with just V600E, it looks to have a fairly tight confidence interval on the good side of 1. So just curious in this metastatic setting.
Yeah, I've got it actually. I can just pull it out from the figure.
Yeah.
So E in the control arm is 174 patients versus 32. So that's a ratio of around 6 to 1, that kind of ballpark. And then if you do the same thing, I'm just using crude figures again in the experimental arm, the numbers are 170 versus 24. So it's a slightly different ratio actually, but the same sort of ballpark. So I guess you're saying 15 odd %. And then if you look at efficacy, carry on, sorry.
That's about 1 out of 6, 1 out of 5.5 in the control arm, but 1 out of 7 in the experimental arm.
Correct.
And that is a subtle enough difference, but there is just enough fewer. By the way, is that the right term? Just enough fewer. I was going to say less, but just enough fewer V600K patients in the experimental arm that it could push the signal in favor. Now, that's not what's happening here. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it's just worth noting that there might be a ever so slightly imbalance of the proportion of patients of K in the control and in the experimental.
Yeah, I mean, also the hazard ratios are pretty similar, I would just say as well for V. This is OS as well, remember.
Yeah.
For E and K, and obviously wider confidence intervals for K.
I mean, I don't see the dot on K, if you will. I see the bar, but I don't see the dot.
Yeah, and you're right about that as well. So I'm assuming that the dot's somewhere in the middle, close to the middle, but you know.
Yeah.
Sorry?
It's a microscope.
Is that a fair assumption? It's a very small dot. Yeah, not much we can do about that. Okay, so yeah, too much else to say here. I'm not really sure actually. What do you think?
No, I think that's good. So let's talk about COMBI-d then. So COMBI-d is dabrafenib, trametinib, compared to, this is confusing because the 5-year update of dabrafenib, trametinib is a combination of COMBI-d and COMBI-v. COMBI-d is dabrafenib, trametinib versus dabrafenib. COMBI-v is dabrafenib, trametinib versus vemurafenib.
Yeah.
But essentially the same theme, which is combination versus monotherapy BRAF inhibitor. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So 563 patients assigned to receive dabrafenib, trametinib. They give us PFS rates here, but maybe what we really want to look at is the 5-year OS. So the overall survival rates were 37% at 4 years and 34% at 5 years in the combination arm. And then this LDH story comes out here as well. So maybe I should go back and make the citation. This is Caroline Robert and Georgina Long as senior author. Caroline Robert is first author, New England Journal of Medicine, and this is in 2019. 5-year outcomes with plus trametinib in metastatic melanoma. And then if you look at their 5-year, they have a PFS according to LDH level. That's in figure, it's figure 1, okay, 1B. And then OS here, similar, they do an OS by LDH. Guess what? It's the same as in coBRIM. Normal LDH is doing better. And maybe it's just worth saying what proportion of our patients here are normal LDH in these studies. Did you mention it in your coBRIM?
No, there we are. If you've got it.
Yeah, it's normal versus elevated. It's about 359 normal versus 192 elevated. So a little less than 2 to 1. So mostly normal, which it bears saying that like when we look at our metastatic trials, what's the proportion of patients with an elevated LDH? Is it, a third of patients or so? Here it's a little kind of more than a third. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think it just really depends. And then are we using a cutoff of just, any value over upper limit? Are we talking about 1.5, 2x? We see it all across the board. And I think, as we've often said, it makes it challenging to interpret when everybody uses a little bit of a different definition. Bottom line here is majority of patients had a normal LDH.
Yeah. I mean, it might be fun to say something about table 1 here.
Okay.
LDH is very close to my heart, as you know. So this is multivariate analysis of baseline factors associated with PFS and OS. And I don't know if you've got it open there or not, but if you look at the PFS and you just look down those hazard ratios, what's the strongest hazard ratio there? LDH, 0.5. And then you look at a few other things, a type of BRAF mutation, for example. So that's E versus K or E, and it's 0.65, something like that. Disease stage, gender, age, even ECOG performance status 0 versus 1, 0.68. Sites of organ metastasis, that's very popular amongst some people, but that's 0.72.
Number, right? Or is it sites?
Yeah, no, number less than 3 versus more than 3. 0.72, and then sum of lesion diameters above and below median 0.97. That was a PFS, just to be really clear, rather than OS. And then if I'm going to do OS as well, obviously.
But I will pause just for a second as you go through this multivariate. All of these things are falling out: age, via 10-year increments, sex, disease stage. But the sex thing is really interesting because there's some work on the androgen receptor conferring kind of a worse outcome in male patients to both targeted and perhaps even checkpoint inhibitor. And so would male patients benefit from androgen receptor blockade to improve the use of targeted therapy? That was not a question we were asking back then, but interesting that you see that this hazard ratio forest plot also suggests that female gender is doing better both in terms of PFS and OS.
I have to say in clinic, I don't know what you think as well, that for my very long-term survival patients who are still on treatment, okay, so not the people who've had checkpoint inhibitors and they've stopped treatment and they've got a chance of being cured, it feels like the bulk of them are female rather than male. Probably a discussion in its own right, and that's just sort of me making an observation in clinic. But yeah, and then if we just, for completeness, I'll just talk about OS in this table as well. What's the winner? LDH hazard ratio 0.47, PS 0.49, so that comes out more strongly PS for OS than it does for PFS. And then actually your organ sites are then probably coming in next 0.58. And then actually gender, sex, whatever your preferred nomenclature is the next thing at 0.68. So, I think it's quite an interesting table. So that was table 1. Back to you.
Yeah, maybe the last point to make on this is overall survival in patients with a normal LDH and less than 3 organ sites of metastasis. So kind of putting together a couple of those things that fell out of multivariate. Those patients are doing very well. And the OS curve for them at 5 years is better than 50%. So 55% overall survival if you have a normal LDH less than 3 sites and you take combination dabrafenib, trametinib in some version of kind of quote unquote first line metastatic therapy. Interesting.
So that just crashed altogether for me. I just said lost internet connection. I got kicked out. I just logged back in. And then you were saying.
Okay, so the last point I was just making is that figure 3, this is progression-free survival and overall survival by best response. And just worth noting for the New England Journal of Medicine, these are invalid graphs and analyses. You cannot graph survival with starting from randomization. So they start this from time 0 and they're graphing by best response. But best response is not a time 0 factor. You don't know it at time 0. You can only graph it from the time it happens. So you can graph this starting from first assessment. You graph Kaplan-Meier curves like this from randomization or from time 0 based on factors that are known at the time of randomization. So gender is known at the time of randomization, number of organ sites, LDH is known, how tall somebody is, what hair color they have, all of that stuff is known, what they ate for breakfast that day, all of that is known at the time of randomization. Their best response to therapy is something that emerges after exposure to therapy, so that's not something you can graph. I'm just surprised this made it past statistical review because these are just not the types of graphs you can show, and it shows what you're supposed to have. The best responding patients do best. The next best responding patients do next best. The least responding patients do the worst. That's not a feature that is present at randomization. So it's just a little misleading to graph things like this. It's just not a valid way to graph this stuff. So that's my soapbox. That's it. I don't think there's much more to say about combination targeted therapy. I mean, maybe what we can do if we're going to do a fact check for this episode is we can just contextualize this where this sits in line with the Columbus data. Columbus is giving us 7-year data, but maybe we can back ourselves up to 5-year. Are there any plateaus forming in targeted therapy? In immunotherapy, we think they start to form around the 3-year mark. Do we see any plateaus forming with targeted therapy? And are these three combinations roughly equivalent in their PFS and OS at 5 years and maybe beyond? Or do we have a clear numerical, above and beyond combination that we should mention? Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just make a couple of extra comments before we close, if I may. First one is that, I mean, I've certainly got some patients in clinic who've never had checkpoint inhibitors, and they've been on BRAF targeted therapy for metastatic disease for over 10 years, and quite a lot over 5 years. So is there a tail on that curve? I think the answer is yes. How big is it? I don't really know. Are those people who've had some sort of immunoactivation somewhere along the way, as well as their targeted therapy, bearing in mind they've never had immunotherapy? That's a question that's certainly in my mind. Never mind how long should they be on treatment, what do you do, how do you monitor them, all sorts of other stuff. But these are all people leading normal lives with minimal side effects. The other point I just want to make here is that sometimes in clinic, there's some negativity about targeted therapy, because we know that often it won't have durable benefit. But, there's patients in clinic with autoimmune disease, for example, who actually it might not be that safe to give checkpoint inhibitors to. You might not choose to do it first line per DreamSeq. Can you get durable benefits with targeted therapy? Yes, you can sometimes. So I think it's actually that message is a reasonably important one to get out there. And then maybe when we do the fact check, you've got the face which says, for those who are watching this on video, you've got the face that says you want to say something else. But what I was going to say is that we could pick up some of those other things in fact check. I think that'd be nice. But go on.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to mention is, because you brought it up, is there immune activation in these patients who've received targeted therapy, never seen immune therapy? Anyway, it's the whole idea of what is the role of MEK inhibitor when it comes to immune activation. So there was early suspicion that MEK inhibitors were detrimental to an immune response. Then maybe they sort of perpetuated an immune response. And where are we now? And maybe that comes into a fact check, or maybe that's just an entirely separate discussion. But I like all of those points that you made.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we're done.
Good. Well, thanks for targeted therapy, long-term follow-up.
Cheers.
Cheers. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Melanoma Matters. Wait, I didn't need to do that bit because this is just a fact check. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We're pretty relaxed about this. We're pretty out of practice. We haven't done a fact check in a minute. But this is a fact check on a BRAF targeted therapy episode we did, where we talked about 5-year results from coBRIM and COMBI, essentially the COMBI-d study, but there's some COMBI-v baked in there. And then had some things that came up that we wanted to talk about. So, but maybe if we're fact checking, we were just having a private conversation about the color of your t-shirt there. You wanted to point out some dumbbell scuff marks on the shoulders, and you said, and I said, but you can't see it because your t-shirt is black, and you're claiming the color of your shirt is your eyes are blue, so I'm looking for something that's the color of your eyes, and that is a gray shirt. Nothing we can fix in post.
We probably could. There must be a way of doing that, but it'd probably be time consuming.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about was, where did Columbus stack up at 5 years? Because we did a Columbus 7-year episode where we might have mentioned Tom Newsom-Davis for the first time on that episode, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the episode where you talk about how you got into medicine. Hang on, I'm just going to change my microphone here because I realize I'm on the wrong microphone. Oh, I can't. Okay. Anyway, you talk about, how you got into oncology specifically, and how you were sitting at the Jeremy Bentham.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was our Columbus 7-year episode. But because the COMBI and coBRIM are 5-year updates, we wanted to just, for benchmarking purposes, where did Columbus pan out at 5 years? So I have the numbers. I made a table that's not going to show well to the viewer, but obviously if you listen, you can make your own table. PFS and OS, coBRIM, COMBI-d, and then Columbus study. And we're just going to talk about the combination, really, arms here, because the monotherapy is pretty consistent. But the PFS in coBRIM at 5 years was 14%. In COMBI, it was 19%. And in Columbus, it's 23%. Columbus has been running around sort of marketing themselves as best in class based on what, hard to say, but these numbers sort of suggest numerically they have a higher 5-year PFS. We also probably got better at managing BRAF MEK and keeping people on treatment between the evolution of Vemcobi and encorafenib binimetinib. So that we have to take into consideration. The OS at 5 years, 31% with coBRIM, 34% COMBI-d, 35% Columbus, 5-year OS. So pretty similar there as far as OS. We asked if we thought there was a plateau forming. With immunotherapy, we often think there's a plateau at about 3 years, and recurrences are pretty rare after 3 years. So when I went through the graphs here, let's say for coBRIM, for example, I could see a 6% drop in PFS and OS between 3 years and 5 years. So it's really hard for me to say that that's a plateau if there's another 6 to 8% drop between these studies, coBRIM, COMBI. So I guess our feeling is maybe not so much a tail or a plateau, but obviously lesser recurrences the later you get, but not certain it's as low as 0 to 1% difference over time. Let's see.
Yeah.
And you just said something when we were sort of planning this fact check. You just said something and I was like, let's hit record because that's a gem.
No. I mean, so what I was wondering is that we accept, I think, that adjuvant targeted therapy, BRAF targeted therapy, is associated with cure. And I don't
no idea where that came. So that's
kind of interesting.
That is not a reflection of the host's feelings. Redo. We can cut that if we need.
Yeah, well, I can redo it. But I think that's uncontroversial to say that we think that there are people who are being cured as a consequence of adjuvant targeted therapy with dabrafenib and trametinib a year of treatment. And we think the reason for that is the eradication of micrometastatic disease in the sensitive patients. So then what I was wondering about is the sort of numerical threshold for eradication of disease with targeted therapy, meaning, well, I think you get it, right? And so, again, if you're picking out these patients that do really well, who've got stage 4 disease, I'm talking about now, and I guess a few with unresectable stage 3 for the record as well in these trials, so let's just bear that in mind. And then we know the ones who do well are the ones with low LDH, low disease burden, etc., etc., etc. And we know that we've got the patients in clinic actually over 10 years now. And so then I am wondering if some of those are potentially cured stochastically, is probably the right word to use, in terms of the disease volume for some of those patients. Maybe it's not that far off some of the patients with what you might call bad stage 3, who again maybe we're curing as well. So maybe there's a bit of an overlap there, and maybe there's a sort of a ceiling, if you want to call it that, for what targeted therapy can do on its own. Bearing in mind though that you might get some immune reconstitution, reactivation. I mean, we talked about that before, haven't we? And this is a disease where there is a tail on the curve as well. Before we had any treatment, we knew that, and we also know that spontaneous regressions occasionally happen as well. So difficult to tease this apart. Although we were just saying, I'm not aware anyone's really systematically gone and looked at all the patients who've got to 3 years to ask the sort of the thing we talk about with checkpoint inhibitors a lot, which is to say that relapses beyond 3 years for people who've responded are really rare. I'm not even sure we have a figure for that. I don't have one. Go on.
Well, I would love, in the episode, you do talk about all the different kind of hazard ratios by these kind of univariate categories. So low LDH or normal LDH versus elevated. number of organ sites, so less than 3 organ sites versus greater than. And by the way, those unresectable stage 3Cs that you were talking about that we lumped into this trial, perhaps by definition end up in that less than 3 organ sites just by kind of definition. And of course, I just asked you, since you were a co-author, does less than 3 organ sites mean just that? So liver, lung, spleen is 3 or less organ sites, or do we, I don't know if it's less than 3 or less, but do we mean that, or do we mean 2 tumors in the liver is less than 3 organ sites of metastasis? You know what I mean? I'm sure you probably mean like anatomic organ sites, but I think as we know, there's a difference between a liver that has a solitary met and a liver that has multiple, 8 or 9 or 10 tumors, and they may not exactly be the same tempo of disease. Despite maybe both of those being less than 3 organ sites. When you go through all those univariate, even things like gender fall out. But really, when we get to the bottom of it, like you said, everybody probably has somebody they've kept on targeted therapy well past a complete response, a quote unquote cure, just because, as you make the point, well, they're tolerating it well, not likely to develop any kind of like long-term immunologic side effects. It's still getting reimbursed. And so then it just sort of turns into there. So then what does that curve look like? What are the characteristics of those patients? Did they start out with normal LDH? Did they have this low tumor burden, less than 3 organ sites, or however we want to define it? I think that is interesting. And you had just mentioned you were going to task one of your intrepid fellows with maybe
Intrepid.
checking.
Did you say?
Well,
did you say intrepid?
Well, that's how I described Andreas Schmidt a couple of years ago. Remember?
Andreas absolutely was and is intrepid. No, they're all intrepid. To be fair, no, I've already sent the email, so I'm going to talk to them about it tomorrow. Because
I like
it's a
it,
nice
and I
little
think
project.
it is. And
Yeah,
you say on the episode, you make a point, because I sort of said something like, whether it's moot or not, because now we've got immunotherapy. And you said, yeah, but of course, immunotherapy, you can't treat everybody a la DREAMseq. But it's worth thinking about. You have somebody progressing off of frontline, and you've got other things to use. But do they fit in this category where, had they been treated in the frontline targeted therapy, they would have an excellent outcome? Normal LDH, low tumor burden. Maybe could you come in with your targeted therapy then? Anyway, I like the project. Happy to contribute and read it. So
yeah, and today's the 29th of December, isn't it?
why do you always do that? You always do this on our podcast. You say the date, and then we don't publish these episodes for like 6 months, and we look silly.
Today could be the 29th of December.
Allegedly.
But I was just trying to think what I should give them as the fellows as a deadline to sort of have the manuscript ready. What do you think? New Year's Eve? I mean, they're not going to be busy, are they, for the next 2 days? What?
You're not throwing a New Year's Eve party for them? What a host! What a preceptor you are.
They've already had a Christmas party. They'll be getting greedy. Treat them mean, keep them keen. That's what I say.
Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! So you just said something that's relevant. Our last little fact to check, you said something about immune activation, and what do we know about MEK and immune activation? Mainly because MEK inhibition for a minute was kind of controversial for us in melanoma. It was, do you combine it with immunotherapy? Is it immune suppressive? Is it immune permissive when you block MEK inhibitors? And it's not that straightforward, as it turns out, right? So maybe I'll just bottom line it here that MEK inhibitor will have mixed results when you combine it with immune checkpoint inhibitors. Here we go. It impairs naive CD8 T cell priming in tumor-bearing mice and then potentially in the periphery. But in the actual tumors, it can protect the TIL that are there, and it can actually lead to increase in effector T cells in the tumor. So it's like got a variable response. So kind of like we probably knew, it's not a binary answer here. You don't just use a MEK inhibitor and get a better or worse immune response. You're augmenting the entire system. And so it's complicated.
Yeah, agree. And it would be surprising if it was I was going to say it'd be surprising if it wasn't complicated and messy and heterogeneous, because you're going to be inhibiting MEK in every cell, cancer cell or normal cell, and guess what? There isn't really going to be, in my opinion anyway, a uniform outcome from that, which is kind of what you just said.
Oh, that's a really insightful comment, because unlike a BRAF inhibitor, it's not just targeting a mutant isoform. It's inhibiting broadly. So yeah, good points.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're done. Was there anything else on the laundry list? No. Shopping list.
So, yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.